Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton, and strangely absent is my mother, Clara. She is actually stranded right now at the beach, and I will let her tell the story next week. I don't want to spoil all the details of this, but it's a little bit of a funny story. But I am recording solo this week because she is not with us. So first of all, I want to thank our patrons who make this podcast possible. You guys are absolutely incredible, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Mom and I talk about this often, where we just we feel connected to our patrons. We have conversations with them routinely. We love doing a live Q&A every month. That's probably our favorite time. And we just have built a community of people who are supportive of us, not just financially, but especially just by offering us encouragement and feedback. And you guys are always making the podcast better. So if you would like to join as a patron of the podcast, if you want to support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout, and you can look at the different tiers and what's offered in each of those tiers, and you can certainly feel free to sign up. Okay, yesterday there was a bombshell report in New York that came out from the Attorney General's office on Governor Andrew Cuomo and the multiple sexual allegations that were stacked up against him. I want to talk about that today, and I don't want to talk about this from a political standpoint. I already have people, I posted some things or something. I posted the live conference yesterday from the Attorney General's office. And, I already had people jumping in and, talking about, Republicans, at least Democrats acknowledge that this is a problem among their own. And that's just, first of all, that's nonsense. Sexual abuse is both a Republican and a Democrat problem. It happens among all of them. Cover-ups are rampant on both sides of the political spectrum. Both sides are probably equally guilty of covering for their own. So I don't want this to be about a political argument, because that's just not what this is about. It's not what the podcast is about. That's not what this episode is about. One of the main purposes of this podcast is for us to give people tools to be able to recognize abusive people. That's my specialty particularly, is being able to profile people and really get a sense of whether somebody is a safe person or not. I'm a little bit more hesitant, or a lot more hesitant, to label somebody and say, I know that they're an abuser. Because oftentimes, until there's evidence, we don't know that they're actually abusing and producing victims. However, we can tell with a pretty strong sense of clarity whether somebody's an unsafe person. And I wanted to talk about Andrew Cuomo because he's been on my radar for a very long time. The guy's just, he's a narcissist. He's a misogynist, and his brother as well. His brother has had sexual allegations against him by different women. And in fact, we'll talk about how his brother, Chris Cuomo, played into this, because he's actually mentioned 4 times in the Attorney General's report. And And what I want to talk about in this episode is how what happens in the governor's office in New York, this culture of silencing people, intimidating people, retaliation, sexual harassment, that's all spelled out in the Attorney General's report. I've read almost the whole report. It just came out yesterday, so I've been reading a lot. And I'm going to read some excerpts from it, but I want to draw some parallels and show that this is so much like what happens in the church. And I'm going to go a little bit farther, and I'm probably going to get some ridicule for this, but this happens in the advocacy community as well. There are unsafe people within the realm of advocacy. And honestly, the more that I am in this culture of abuse advocacy, I don't see much difference anymore between advocacy and the church, where people protect their own, where victims are silenced, where people are scared of certain advocates, and they're intimidated, they're bullied. Kelly Downing had an excellent podcast on Survivor Sanctuary a couple weeks ago. I think I mentioned that already. I listened to it, and it is phenomenal. Kelly Downing is absolutely wonderful, and that episode was, just spot on, where she talked about this culture of bullying and intimidation from abuse advocates, where she has survivors as well who come to her, and they're crying out saying, I've been bullied, I've been intimidated, I've been silenced, I've been shamed, I've been labeled, put the word phobe on the end of it. I've been labeled a bigot, I've been labeled whatever, fill in the blank. So Kelly did a really, really good job of laying that out and just saying there's no excuse for it. In the realm of advocacy, one of the things that I see that's really troublesome is this sense of loyalty. And I've had people say to me, well, Jimmy, you work for Grace, and so, you've got to be really careful what you say and who you say it to. And I'm just going to say right now, I have no loyalty to anyone or any organization beyond my family and my God. Beyond that, I have no loyalty to anybody. So when people use that, and they've used my own platform, well, you have your own platform, so you need to be really careful what you say, and you got to be careful not to call certain people out, and that just doesn't work for me. So I'm kind of like this oddball where I'm not silenced because of my loyalty to certain people or certain organizations. So I'm just putting that out there. I think maybe I'm a little bit scary to some people because of that, because I'll speak truth. And I will treat people with kindness and fairness. And I don't bully people. I don't demand loyalty to me. I think it's just really dangerous territory when we start silencing people or saying we're not allowed to talk about certain people because of what organization or because of what circle of friends they're attached to. I just think that's really, really dangerous to do that. And so I don't play those games. I literally have no loyalty to anybody beyond my family and my God. So with that said, I want to read from the Attorney General's report. This is on page 3. And they kind of give a summary of each of the victims. And some of these victims are mentioned by name because they went on record by name. So, which I commend them, and I think that's incredibly courageous. But one of them is Charlotte Bennett, and she is an abuse survivor. She's young. She's in her 20s. And she was kind of in a fragile state of mind. And Andrew Cuomo knew that, and here's some of the things he did. I'll let the report speak for itself. The governor made inappropriate comments, including, among many other things, Remember, this is just a summary, and then it breaks each of these victims into kind of a full discovery. So, number one, telling Mrs. Bennett and talking about potential girlfriends for him that he would be willing to date someone who was as young as 22 years old. He knew Miss Bennett was 25 at the time. Number two, asking her whether she had been with older men. Number three, saying to her during the pandemic that he was lonely and, quote, wanted to be touched. Number four, asking whether Miss Bennett was monogamous. Number five, telling Miss Bennett after she told him that she was considering getting a tattoo for her birthday, that if she decided to get a tattoo, she should get it on her butt where it could not be seen. Number six, asking whether she had any piercings other than her ears. And number seven, saying that he wanted to ride his motorcycle into the mountains with a woman. These comments by the governor, as evidenced contemporaneously in numerous text exchanges Miss Bennett had with others, followed and coincided with discussions she previously had with the governor about her having been a survivor of sexual assault, and made her extremely uncomfortable. Now, here's where it gets really, I think, important. They made her so uncomfortable that following a series of exchanges with the governor in June 2020, Ms. Bennett reported the interactions to the governor's chief of staff. While the executive chamber moved Mrs. Bennett to a different position where she would not need to interact with the governor in response to Ms. Bennett's allegations, the executive chamber did not report the allegations at the time to the governor's Office of Employee Relations, the state agency tasked with conducting harassment investigations for state agencies, and did not otherwise conduct any formal investigation. Instead, the executive chamber's senior staff sought to implement a practice whereby individual staff members who were women were not to be left alone with the governor. This is insanity. And this is what the church does with sexual predators. It's no different. The governor's office in New York is no different than this crap that the church pulls, where they're like, well, multiple people reported in Governor Cuomo's office. They reported to the executive chamber, and this attorney general's report finds that the executive chamber has a culture of intimidation, of silencing victims, and of not investigating these allegations. Some of these are very serious allegations. What I just read to you were some very minor allegations compared to some of the others in this report. And these are bad. I mean, these are bad enough. But, everything from groping to putting his hand up under women's shirts and groping their breasts to hugging them and groping their rear ends multiple times, kind of lifting them up off the ground by their butts while he was hugging them. I mean, this guy's an absolute creep. All right? And these are people who work for him. One of them was a state trooper. He was groping and, rubbing and whispering things in her ear, doing this all in front of other people. And I specialize in abuse in plain sight. So other people saw this. They witnessed this, probably not as much as we would like to think, but it did happen because there were other people who corroborated these victims' stories, including other state troopers who said that they witnessed both the touching and all the weird stuff, whispering in her ear, and they said that this state trooper, the female state trooper who was the victim, she came and talked to her peers about how uncomfortable the governor made her. So, this is all corroborated. This all happened. So the problem is that the executive chamber did exactly what the church does, where they're like, well, yeah, this might be a problem. He might just like to hug a little bit too much or whatever. So we're going to separate women from him. The governor's not allowed to be left alone with women. I mean, are we in third grade or second grade or kindergarten? right? That's the kind of stuff that my wife does at her preschool. When there's a problematic kid who's just getting in other people's space and bothering them, they separate the kids. After a while, you've got to realize that separating adults from other adults is a really childish thing to do. What they should have done is investigated this like they were supposed to. And sure, separate. I mean, I'm not saying separating victims from the abuser is a childish thing. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that not even mentioning it to the governor and then separating him, saying, well, he's not really safe to be around women, so we're just gonna not let women be around him, including his own staff. Like, that's insanity. That's childish. What they should have done is investigated. They should have made this public. They should have let people know. They should have let other staff know. They should have put a bulletin out to all of his staff saying, there are serious allegations against the governor. We are investigating it. And as of right now, he is not safe to be around. So don't do it. Don't go anywhere near him. Put him on some kind of probation, something. But they didn't do that. They covered it up. And they failed to investigate it. And they let this culture go on. So one of the things that I have a problem with is that Governor Cuomo was touted by so many abuse advocates as this hero because of the legislation, the 2-year window that New York passed, I think it was a couple years ago. I think that was 2019, that Governor Cuomo signed it. He signed this legislation and was out there publicly talking about how much he cares for all survivors. And, he's really sensitive to abuse. And he's just kind and he's compassionate. And he's so honored to sign this legislation. And abuse advocates were like hailing him as some hero. And I just took a step back and I didn't say anything publicly, but I was like, this guy is, if you just watch him, if you watch his interactions, I mean, he's no different than President Trump was around women. The high degree of inappropriate talk, the locker room talk, the behavior, like this was all evident. And you could see that it was evident. President Biden, same thing. Like, the guy is an absolute creep. He gropes kids. He talks about how they play with the hair on his legs and like all the wildly inappropriate comments that he still makes towards little kids and women. It's just gross and it's not appropriate. And those kinds of things, when people are crying out, when victims are saying, look, you are making me uncomfortable, when you can physically see that people are uncomfortable, when you see people pulling back because they're being made uncomfortable, there ought to be some kind of investigation. Like this culture that's in politics is no different than the culture that's in the church. And it's no different than this culture that's in the realm of advocacy. It's got to stop. People have got to stop making people feel uncomfortable. They've got to stop being misogynists and making rude comments and telling people that they demand their loyalty. It's insanity. We should never call people to demand loyalty to any person or any organization. That's just creepy, isn't it? Like, am I alone here? It's just creepy. When we're saying, like, you've got to be loyal to, this person because they're really wildly respected. My response is, are they respected because they're tied to an organization or because they're an actually decent person? Because there's a difference, right? So if people are treating you poorly behind closed doors, if you feel unsafe, whether it's an abuse advocate or a pastor or a governor or you name it, if you feel unsafe because this person is making you feel unsafe, and you start crying out, and the response is, but he's such a nice guy. You're no different and you're no better than all these churches that we're calling out. Abusive behavior is abusive behavior is abusive behavior, and it doesn't matter who the people are. We ought to be willing to speak out against it because it's just gross and it's wrong. And it shouldn't take a whole army of people crying out, a whole army of victims coming forward. It shouldn't take an attorney general's investigation to be able to call people out for this kind of gross misbehavior. So some of the other stuff, I'm just going to read some of this stuff. Forgive my pausing and kind of rambling here because I didn't highlight some of these, so I'm just trying to cherry pick, I guess, some of the really gross ones. Okay, here's one. This was Lindsay Boylan, page 4 of the AG report. Andrew Cuomo commented on her appearance and attractiveness, including comparing her to a former girlfriend and describing her as attractive. Number 2, he paid attention to her in a way that led her supervisor at ESD to say that the governor had a quote, crush on her, and to ask whether she needed help dealing with the governor's conduct. So here you have somebody, thank God, somebody witnessed it and stepped in and was like, do you need help handling the governor's gross conduct? Number 3, physically touched her on various parts of her body, including her waist, legs, and back. Number 4, made inappropriate comments, including saying to her once on a plane words to the effect of, quote, let's play strip poker. And 5, kissed her on the cheeks and on one occasion on the lips. On and on and on. I mean, guys, I could go on for hours just on this report alone. Now, what's interesting about this is you get the whole family dynamic. And I get this a lot when I consult with churches or when I do trainings or when people are just reaching out to me. It's this, again, this loyalty to people, this peer-to-peer loyalty. This person's my peer. He's my co-pastor. He's my elder. He's my whatever. They're like, you don't understand what our relationship is and how important our relationship is. And I don't want to ruin their reputation by speaking out. I know that what he's doing is wrong, but I don't want to ruin our friendship and I don't want to ruin his reputation. I hear that often. In fact, going back to Kelly Downing, she just had another podcast on what about people who say this is going to ruin their reputation. It's total crap. And I remind people, by you speaking up about this, you're not ruining their reputation. They're ruining their own reputation by shoving their hands up women's shirts and grabbing their rear ends and doing things like that. Like, they're the ones ruining their own reputations by doing these things. And shouldn't we speak up? And I also remind people, I'm not really the person to talk to about loyalty and how that overrides speaking out against abuse. I reported my own father. My mom was by my side when we reported my dad to the local police. Never once did I hear my mom say, oh, but he's your dad, and look at all the good that he's done. Never once did I hear my mom say, well, I was married to him for, 36 years, and, look at all the good that he did in his life. Not once did my mom say that. Never did she appeal to her relationship to him or my relationship to him. And never once did I appeal to my relationship with my father, because when there are allegations, there is no loyalty to that person. We owe no loyalty to anybody when there are facts that are right in front of us of serious allegations. We don't owe those people anything. I owed my father nothing. I owed him nothing. Doesn't mean, I didn't love him. Doesn't mean I wasn't really conflicted when I was reporting him. I write about that in my book, The Devil Inside. I wrote about how conflicted I was in that police station. It sucked. It was awful. but I owed no loyalty to him. What he did was indefensible. It was wrong. It was gross. It was inappropriate. It caused a lot of damage. And I owed him no loyalty. So we can't say that about Chris Cuomo, Governor Cuomo's brother. He works for CNN. And they've had some really bizarre exchanges, and that's a whole nother story. But the whole nose swab skit that they did on national news, it was weird. It was creepy. It was bizarre. I watched that and I was like, these two, like, people are literally dying of COVID, and they're turning around pointing the finger at people, saying, look how bad they handled this, look how bad they handled mitigation, and, they're causing people to die. They were pointing the finger all over the place doing that. And then Chris Cuomo comes out with this big swab, and they literally put on, it looked like a VBS, Vacation Bible School skit that you would put on at a church. Like, it was weird. It was strange. And I just watched it and I was like, what is wrong with these people? But here's where it gets really interesting. In the Attorney General's report, Chris Cuomo was giving a script to his brother for what to say publicly about all these pesky victims who are calling him out for this abuse. So this is an article that I'm reading in Apple News called, it's by David Bauder, Bauder, and the title is New York Report Details CNN's Chris Cuomo's Role Advising Brother. So here is this email exchange. So in the email, it was suggested that Andrew Cuomo say that, quote, sometimes I'm playful and make jokes. My only desire is to add some levity and banter to what is a very serious business. That's what Chris Cuomo sent in an email to his brother Andrew Cuomo. It's all about damage control. It's about, how do you portray your public image? Let me help you, brother. Let me help you to publicly look like you're a decent guy. Let me read that again. Sometimes I'm playful and make jokes. My only desire is to add some levity and banter to what is a very serious business. First of all, who talks like that? I mean, these guys are so fake and hypocritical. And you learn a lot about public statements. And speaking of public statements, it didn't take Andrew Cuomo long to come out with his own public statement. And for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to play the first part of his public statement that came out, and it's absolutely repulsive. So this came out yesterday after the AG's report came out.
It has been a hard and a painful period for me and my family, especially as others feed ugly stories to the press. But I cooperated with a review, and I can now finally share the truth. My attorney, who is a non-political former federal prosecutor, has done a response to each allegation, and the facts are much different than what has been portrayed. First, I want you to know directly from me that I never touched anyone inappropriately or made inappropriate sexual advances. I am 63 years old. I've lived my entire adult life in public view. That is just not who I am. And that's not who I have ever been.
What an absolute creep. And I listened to about half of this. It's 14 minutes long. I listened to about 7 minutes of it, and I just had to turn it off. And I in the words of the assistant district attorney at my dad's sentencing, after my dad got up and spoke, she started by saying, I, me. She's like, that's all I heard in your statement. And I almost stood up and applauded her. The words I and me, I'm going to go back and I'm actually going to count how many times he said it. But Andrew Cuomo is an absolute narcissist. The whole time it was all about him This hurts me so bad. All these false things that are being said about me. It's just been so hard on me and my family. Me. He never says anything unless it's bad about his victims. And of course he doesn't call them victims. They're all just these women who he just doesn't know what they have against him and why they would make all this stuff up. And again, guys, this has all been corroborated. Everything that these victims said has been corroborated, and it's true. It's all written in the Attorney General's report. And I don't know how people keep falling for people like Andrew Cuomo and like all these pastors and even abusive advocates. How do people keep falling for these people? We've got to start looking through this public image. When you see people start talking in a way that they don't normally talk, when they're in front of a camera or they're in front of an audience and you see this shift in personality, that ought to be the biggest red flag in the world. I tell people, like, I'm an open book, and what you see is what you get. If we're having a private conversation, and any of you people who've had private conversations with me, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I'm talking to you now is the way I talk to people in private always. And that's whether it's my family, whether it's my church, whether it's friends, whether it's survivors who are reaching out to me. It doesn't matter because I am who I am. I don't change. I don't need to. I don't need to please people. I don't need to pretend like I'm this righteous person when I'm not, right? Like, we don't have to pretend. And if people are pretending, it becomes pretty evident. So with Cuomo, for me, it became pretty evident a long time ago that this guy was a fraud, that he puts up a facade, both him and his brother. His brother has all these hot mic moments and, berating people. And he is an absolute abusive jerk. Both of them are. And I don't know what kind of home they grew up in, but it's not cool. It's not acceptable. It's not okay. It's not okay to bully people and intimidate them and to publicly talk like this. I'm so broken. Oh, me and my family. This has been so hard on me and my family. It's an act. This is all an act. And if we can't see through this, maybe we better start looking a little bit harder and just read between the lines and forget your loyalty to, I get loyalty. I mean, I get it to a degree, but for a moment, suspend your loyalty to whatever political party you're loyal to. Suspend it for a little bit and try to look at people objectively and stop saying, well, it's only Republicans who cover up for abusers. Look at Kavanaugh. Look at what they did there. It's only Republicans. It's just not true. And the flip side of that is, equally as strong. Well, it's only Democrats. Democrats, all they want to do is, kill babies and, whatever. That's not true. We've got to stop having this hardline loyalty to one political party or one religious denomination or one religious local congregation, whatever it is, or one pastor. We've got to stop having this die-hard loyalty where the person on our side can do no wrong. Because people are getting hurt. Real people are getting hurt. Guys, I implore you to read this Attorney General's report. Listen to the pain that these survivors are living with, that Andrew Cuomo created. He produced this pain. He caused it. He bullied people. He intimidated people. He threatened people with their jobs. He hired people. One of the women, one of his victims, he met her at a fundraising event, and she got a phone call a couple days later and got offered a job in the governor's office for I think it was like $122,000. And they said it was such a ridiculous amount for what her job was that they laughed on the phone about it when they hired her. So she was hired thinking that, wow, like the governor really sees this talent in me, and he's offering me this triple digit, or 6-digit job. Yeah, triple, 6-digit job. And then he starts abusing her right away. Guys, we've got to stand up to this stuff and stop being loyal. And I'm thankful. And, with that said, I am thankful that there are some governors, including my own, and I'm not a fan of our governor in Pennsylvania at all. I am just not a fan. And I won't go into reasons, but, there's some stuff that I just radically disagree with. But I'm proud to say that our governor publicly signed a letter with 3 other Democratic governors calling for Andrew Cuomo to step down and resign. I think that's honorable, and I think we ought to call that out, as such, and say, like, this is pretty cool, actually. Like, that's promising that our governor, with all the disagreements I have, at least, excuse me, at least he's willing to stand up and say, like, I have no loyalty to Andrew Cuomo. I think that's pretty cool, and I think that's pretty noble. And I think when somebody does something right, we ought to publicly say that somebody did something right. So yeah, kudos to those 4 governors, Democratic governors, who stood up and called for his public resignation. I think that's pretty cool. So I'm going to wrap this up and just say, like, know that this culture exists, the same culture that's in Governor Cuomo's office of fear and intimidation and demanded loyalty, that exists in the church. It exists in politics. It exists in advocacy. It exists in just about every facet of every occupation that's out there. So beware when somebody starts demanding loyalty to them and they start appealing to their friendship and saying, well, I need you to stick by my side. I need you to be loyal to me. That is the biggest red flag in the world. Run from that person. And I mean that. Because that's not safe. If somebody demands your loyalty to an organization or silences you and says, well, Jimmy, your relationship with Grace, run away. Because that's no better and no different than what the church is doing. It's no better. At the end of the day, we shouldn't ever have people warning us that, remember that, you got to be loyal to this person or this organization. Just beware. That's a very dangerous tactic, and that's what silences people, and that's what empowers people like Andrew Cuomo to keep on producing victim after victim after victim. All right. Truth bomb for the day. View people objectively and don't allow them to demand loyalty to them. Don't allow them to do that to you. Thank you for tuning into this episode. And next episode, we'll let Mom tell her story about how she got stranded at the beach. Thanks again, listeners, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron. And check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.